So, some comments out of the ominous spirit of disorder, which in some way is ghosting about our time, although in an included or shadowed way, so that we don't see its essence. We see the shadows, we don't see the sun, because we're like bats, as Aristotle put it. Um, so, I think in Nietzsche, if we want to construct a better understanding of the Heideggerian position, we have a springboard or a lever or, something that will help us in that endeavor. So remembering that Heidegger pointed out such things as that by going back and forth between different languages, we thereby produce a fuller understanding of our own world, our own linguistically housed world. So going back and forth between the great thinkers, the students of philosophy, which even the great thinkers are still students of philosophy, but perhaps the students of philosophy which haven't proceeded so far to the peak, but perhaps those which have strains which have not, in the style of Van Gogh or so, have not come to the general attention, or it could be for other reasons. The great philosophers who are recognized as great philosophers include then, of course, Nietzsche and Heidegger. Heidegger was somewhat, he had a kind of frailty of health that manifested all throughout his life, which was, would have probably fallen more under the psychoanalytic department, remembering that people like Freud and Jung were medical doctors, and they were under the spell of Ernst Haeckel and such people. Ernst Haeckel was the leading proponent of Darwin in Freud's youth. I was under the false impression that he was actually a personal teacher of Freud, but I guess Freud read his book early on, and Freud was part of basically the first generation where Darwin was the big thing. But so, yeah, Freud and Jung were basically biologically minded. As Leo Strauss says, Freud was and remained throughout his life a naive believer on science in the current interpretation, which would mean for Freud that everything should be able to be stated in the terms of physiology or medical science ultimately. But because certain ailments couldn't be neatly categorized as organic, as visible in the bodily organs, or as, let's say, having their source in the bodily organs, even if they might be visible there in some way as symptoms, it was necessary to go off into the psychoanalytic world. And so, being roughly the same time period, I think it's appropriate to point out that whatever it was that was troubling Heidegger was usually not of a obviously organic order, and he's had these problems. I think when he tried to go to Berlin when he was younger, and he couldn't stand it there, he had to be at least in a middle-sized town, if not. Of course, he preferred to be in a tiny village. But in late life, his wife was in something like the manner that wives will tell their husbands, don't take too many drinks, and things of that kind, would warn Heidegger not to read Nietzsche. And the reason is Heidegger would periodically have these kind of fits where he would just fall into a black funk and just finally, in his to give an example, the essential example here is in late life, Heidegger's son overheard him muttering to himself, Nietzsche hat mich kaputt gemacht. or kaputt gemacht, I'm not sure. But Nietzsche has broken me. And Gadamer was asked about this, and he said he didn't know what to say there. But at the very least, it shows the importance Nietzsche was playing here. So, what is the Nietzschean position, first of all? The Nietzschean position, I think we bring out, partly we can bring it out through a political look. So, I think you could go to Camus, right? So, in Camus, you can see more, the more the metaphysical, or as it were, the deeper, the more technical, philosophical side of it, let's say, the side that requires thinking about things that are very basic and sometimes abstract. So in the myth of Sisyphus, I think we have a modification of Nietzsche's so-called, how do you call it, the amor fati, the love of life. So that's a particular species of the general thing that the sort of the intellecti of the Übermensch. What the Übermensch does is he creates these quote unquote life-giving lies. So which means basically that even though you know that your goal is useless, a hopeless cause, a lost cause, you nonetheless go on just as though maybe it might not be. So it's slightly different than the sort of the Japanese or the Eastern thing, where you know the goal is useless, you're an illusion, but that very fact sort of makes you joyous in your hopeless cause. I mean, so Christianity was partly popularized in Japan for this reason, that everybody thought it's totally idiotic and stupid, but it's like how beautiful to give one's life to a totally obviously lost cause, like, because human beings are sort of a bad lot, and the heil or salvation is not to be expected. So the Nietzsche's is a little bit different. He's actually saying, well, maybe it is to be expected. Maybe we don't know. So maybe this historicism, this notion, this becoming uncertain of the process of liberalism, of enlightenment, of so on, of the in Süddeutschland, in the south, in Bavaria, in the Catholic areas in Nietzsche's time, in Prussia, there was this saying, durch Nacht und Blut, through night and blood, zur Licht, so to the light. So that's the Deutsch, the German flag with its black, red, and yellow was not originally the German flag during Nietzsche's time. It wasn't the Prussian flag, and in fact, Nietzsche hated that project, that Austrian Catholic Universalist project. He resented it. It's key that we remember that resentment for Nietzsche is not a bad thing. There's a technical term, ressentiment, but resentment is a good thing for Nietzsche because it makes you angry. It gives you power. It's like anger. So yeah, you have this in Nietzsche's time, this sort of rise of what we would now call liberalism and sort of Atlanticist politics, and say the side of Biden rather than the side of Trump. So in this one sense, Nietzsche would be on the reactionary side, as it were. He's on the side of Prussia. He's on the side of Bismarck, and he's on the side of the grand things, the grand style. So the grand style might only be a grand style. So say the writing style of Plato or something like that. It's a beautiful style, but there's always going to be other wise men, other poets, other philosophers, which will have a comparable style, comparably great, maybe not better, but comparable. Dante, the dialogues of Berkeley and Bishop Berkeley in English, which are somewhat comparable to those of Plato's in their literary merit. So the style is to say style implies it's not the truth. So basically that links to the third critique of Kant. So if you start with the third critique of Kant, you say we're only dealing with taste or style, and you can't say objectively which is higher. Then you just simply add that with the moral issues, with the political issues, exactly the same as the third critique, except there's more, they're more fraught. People care about them more. Exactly the same. So from that you get to Nietzsche's position of the grand style, as it were. So one style is this thing that Zizek is now saying about Habermas, which he's saying with Habermas there were still the Nachholen or catch-up revolutions, which basically meant that the liberal project, Europe, the Atlantic countries, the rich North Atlantic West are the model. Everybody else is trying to catch up to them. So this conforms with the Catholic southern Germany and Austria and Habsburgs and so on. And let's say Maria Theresa, for instance, in Austria, 50 years before the French Revolution, Maria Theresa already put in civil rights. She didn't personally like Jews. She hated Jews personally, but she recognizes there has to be civil rights, and the Jews have to be. There's a lot of Jews in Austria at the time. They have to be included. Even the Italians have to be included. They were part of it. There was already this liberal project, and she had co-educational education from age 6 to 12, learned to read and write. She was way ahead of her time. Then Napoleon comes along and totally depresses everyone and makes one think this project is useless. So then from the point of the Übermensch, or from the point of the life-giving lie, you could then say they're still pretending this project might work, like Zizek, right? Maybe the principles in place, maybe it could still work, maybe we could still overcome human nature, so on and so forth. And then you have this more subtle form in the more fati, where it's you say even if we just live the same thing more and more, we can still force our way out, wiggle our way out, and make it into something great and true and perfect. So the ultimate highest point then of this Nietzschean point of view, to cap this off, we'll go into the Heideggerian one next time, is the resentment means that in the highest teleology, in the sense that the shoemaker knows how to make the shoes, he knows the right way to do it, he has the intellect, to know what to do, the rock knows how to fall. You don't want to bias yourself in that highest principle. So you can't have a resentment against the highest principle. You have to be free in the highest principle. That's the essential freedom. So this is as far, and then Heidegger understands this as merely an ontic view of things. So we'll get into why, on Heidegger's view,